welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today the curls are a little bit out of control. My wet set got a little crazy, but I have a great project for you guys today. I'm really excited about this one. So I finally am going to be upcycling all these linens I've been collecting for years now. Stuff with borders and stuff like this. With the embroidery and stuff, I finally feel like I have a good game plan for them. That is what we're doing today. I'm really excited. So basically, I am inspired by the brand Fillyboo. I came across their stuff, I don't know exactly when, but they kind of basically make clothing that mimics these linens. They aren't upcycled from these types of linens. And seeing their stuff, I finally figured out what I want to do. I'm not going to include any images by them in this video because copyright and stuff. I will link like this particular dress that inspired me down below in case you're curious. And that dress basically has big flowy sleeves and then a bunch of ruffles. I think for me, I want this to be kind of more of like a springy summer dress, so I'm actually gonna go sleeveless. I'm gonna pop in a pattern of the bodice that I'm gonna use. I actually just ordered the pattern yesterday because I finally figured out I didn't have what I needed in my collection already. So I ordered that yesterday. It should be coming in later this week in plenty of time. The only reason I'm making this dress right now is unfortunately I was having a trip to Palm Springs in LA and it got canceled because one of the marriers got COVID, and so we're delaying the batch party until June. So with that, I now have all this time to finally tackle this project that I've been really excited about. And as far as patterns go, I have that one in the corner. I wasn't really expecting to do this project this week, which is why it's on order right now. So that should hopefully be here later this week, and it's fine because the skirt is going to take a ton of work. So for the skirt, I felt like I just needed like a good layered ruffly skirt. I really don't like the top on this design. I really only got it for the skirt because this then has ruffles that are already pre-curved, all measured out and ready for me to go. I just have to basically quilt the pieces together. So that is the first thing I'm going to work on is the skirt. This is a Lady Marlowe pattern, so it is a reproduction, and it's good because then the paper is a little bit more solid, which I feel like is going to be easier for me figuring out the quilting and stuff. But yeah, I am a little worried. I actually have less of these linens than I thought I did. I'm going to check one more place and see if I have any more, but I definitely thought I had more of these than I do. So I am also going to be stopping in a couple antique malls to pick up more of these, which is not my ideal. It's going to be a really expensive way to do this, but I do really want to get this dress completed. And then the other fabric that I'm using as a base is I'm just going to use one of the white cotton lawns I have in my stash because I do feel like I need a base for the bodice, and then the way the ruffles go on the skirt, I need a base for that skirt as well. So that is all of my planning and plotting. I'm really excited to finally get started on this. It's going to be a lot of work. So I'm going to start on the skirt. I guess I'll probably start by cutting the cotton lawn base of the skirt, but after that I'm just gonna, I guess, start jumping into the ruffles and walking you through how I decide to do this. This is not a project where I have like a preset game plan. This one I feel like I kind of have to go with the flow. So you're gonna join me in going along with this flow. With that, we're gonna go ahead and jump into cutting things out. So first I am starting by cutting out this cotton lawn. This is just some cotton lawn I have sitting in my stash, and I have it for use in linings or things that I need to like bring something together or whatever. So that is why I have this, and I am just using it. The markings here are pretty intense because I do have to mark each tier, and I'm trying to be pretty precise about it because otherwise these tiers are going to end up at weird angles, and we definitely do not want that. So I am very, very tediously marking everything. And here you can see I'm using my phone flashlight to get just a little bit more sheerness or like visibility into the fabric. So that way I can make sure that, again, I'm making all these markings correct. And then I am also focusing on getting the underskirt sewn together. This is just so that way I don't have to worry about it when I have all of my supplies gathered. So here I am marking the darts and then pinning those so I can stitch them. There are a lot of darts in the skirt. There's 4 in the front and 4 in the back. And then of course I am sewing the darts. I feel like I'm still working on getting a pin system that works well for me with darts. And I'm already almost done in pinning up the side seams. And then here I am sewing those up. This was a pretty straightforward skirt to do, not too shabby, and now I can move on to gathering all my linens. Alrighty, I am outside an antique shop. I didn't plan to go to an antique shop this early, but I do not have anywhere near the number of linens I thought I did, and I definitely need more. And I don't live at a place where these are going to be in the thrift shops. These are only going to be at an antique mall here. So I drove to the one that's the closest to where I live, which is still pretty far. I'll go to another one that is even further from me in like a couple days if I can't find what I need here. This one here doesn't have as much sewing supplies, so I don't know how I feel. I wasn't even going to take you along, but then I had a fantastic hair day, so I decided to take you along. I feel like I'm having an A+ hair day, and somebody needed to see it besides Spooky. So yeah, that is the plan. I did successfully find all the linens I needed at the antique mall, and so now it is time to wash them. Usually I would actually do this outside, but it is gross and rainy and won't keep the water warm. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting the water as hot as possible, and then I'm adding in some retro clean according to the number of gallons in the tub, and pouring all that in, mixing it around, and then I am putting in my linens, and I am putting them in kind of like in a layer. I don't know what's quite ideal here, but I'm just trying to figure it out. And then once I stack all these linens in, I am just kind of agitating some things with a spoon. This is mostly a soak with the retro clean, but I figure it can't hurt to kind of poke them around. The lighting here is really different, but hopefully you can tell there's a good amount of yellow in the water, which is why I did this, is I just felt like it would give me a better accuracy of the actual color of the linens. And I'm doing a couple rounds of rinsing here with warm-ish water before washing them with real laundry soap, just so that way I make sure they are nice and clean. This was quite the process. This was not great for my body, but I really wanted to do this. Normally, like I said, I would do this outside or by machine or whatever, but that's not how it worked out in this case. And then for the final rinse, I am putting them in the sink and just rinsing them that way, and then I am laying them down flat on a towel to squeeze all the water out that I can get before hanging them to dry. All right, good morning. I am very excited for today. So we had some impromptu snow in Seattle. It's already melting, which is great because I need to run a couple errands today. But besides the errands I'm running, I finally have washed all the linens I bought. Everything is ready for me to start sewing the ruffles. So I have the whole skirt done, and my goal for the next 2 days is to work on the ruffles. I will do a check-in tomorrow if I've made enough progress, but if not, I won't do a check-in. Basically, I've slotted these next 2 days to do the ruffles, and then my pattern comes in on Friday, and so then Saturday my goal is to make the bodice. So we have still 3 more days, I think, of working on this project. I'll probably check in for sure before the bodice, but I think everything should be pretty straightforward and just like really creative and fun, which I'm excited for. Why are you so mad? Okay, you silly cat. You silly cat. So yeah, I'm feeling really excited today. I don't think this is going to be easy, and I have to kind of figure out what my process of patchworking these together actually is, but I am sure I will figure it out. I'm sure it will all be fine. But yeah, I am definitely feeling a little daunted at this point because now we're to like the brain puzzling part of this project. So with that, let's just go ahead and hop into it. And now it is time to sort my big pile of linens that I have here. These are the combo of the ones that I bought for this project, as well as ones that I've just had. So what I'm doing here is I am sorting them by like their level of whiteness, if that makes sense. Linens just like vary a bit. Some are more cream than white, and it's really hard to tell. So I'm sitting right in front of the window and sorting the cream from the white, with the plan to use the white for this project and cream for another project. Also, you can see all the pattern pieces I have out here. These are all the different tiers. So what I'm doing first is I am cutting the embroidery and the edges and separating it from like the pillowcase part. I'm saving that nice pillowcase fabric in case I need it for different projects or as mock-ups, but I am not using it in like this project. I measured the longest ruffle, which was about 12 inches, and made sure I was cutting with enough length for that final longest ruffle, so that way I could meet the curves and all that stuff. And then I went ahead and I cut all of my white linens up. This was the scariest part of the process by far. And then my next step is the general layout of the skirt. I laid these out after doing the first panel, which you can see there. It's the 4th one down. And I just wanted to have one done so I knew what the process was like. And then I am now looking at all the different colors of the linens and spreading out all the different like colors and textures and patterns and stuff, so that way it feels even in the skirt and the skirt doesn't feel like too heavily colored in one spot over the other. And after I get started, I start on the second to bottom ruffle. I'm going to go through all the ruffles before doing the very bottom ruffle, just in case I don't have enough linens. So here I am just kind of arranging and trying to figure out exactly how things will sit. But before I actually pin these down, I want to finish the edges, so I am just finishing like the edges and the areas that I chopped off that are going to be on the sides, not the top. I am just finishing those with a double fold hem. And then with those all finished and pressed, I am just working on figuring out exactly how to lay them so they work best with the pattern, and then of course I will pin those in place. And it's hard to tell what I'm doing here, but I am top stitching those down in place before then using the pattern piece to cut down the piece to actually fit to the pattern. I did this at the very end because I figured things would shift until I had things like top stitched and actually anchored down. And then with the front down, I focused on laying down the back so the back would kind of vaguely reflect the front. I ended up laying them both out, both the front and the back out at the same time on other tiers. Just while I was still figuring things out, I was doing these kind of more separately. But here I'm just following basically that exact same process. I've finished the edges already and I'm just kind of laying things out before pinning them and then top stitching them down. And I got better footage of the top stitching here. You'll notice 2 rows of stitching. The first row is from that narrow hem, and that's the one that is like not as close to the edge as what I'm sewing here, which is as close to the edge as I can get. And then again, I'm repeating the process of cutting down the panels I've sewn together to fit the pattern piece. I've decided kind of a faux felted seam is going to be what matches the other seams that I've already made with the top stitching. So here, what I am first doing is I am stitching these together on the sides, the front and the back panel, pressing them open before I am then trimming down one side so I can press and fold the other side onto it. And then again, top stitching it so that way it will match the other stitching I already have. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a basting stitch all around the top on the stitching line. This is not technically necessary, but I did have little flaps flapping, so it helped with that because of like those edges, as you can see me going over here. But then I was also doing it because the lines that I marked on the base skirt are the stitching line, not the like where you set it line. So it was important that I had a stitching line on these here to match that too. And then enjoy while I do the laying out process on other layers. This one here was kind of a challenging one because I had this diagonal idea because I wanted to show off this embroidery and give it kind of a different feel and have all the skirt panels. I kind of have like them do a center front and then like 2 kind of more side focus ones and then a center and then side and then a center and a side. I don't quite know if I achieved that, but I did try, and that's kind of what I'm doing here is that side look. And honestly, the biggest part of this is just arranging and trying and rearranging and arranging some more and maybe not being necessarily the happiest, but eventually deciding I'm okay with how everything's sitting and being ready to actually top stitch them down and then move on to the next panel. After doing 2 other panels, I decided that first panel I did off camera. I didn't like how things were set up, so I was just unpicking this because there's like 2 diagonals in the front with a center panel, and one of the diagonals was going the opposite way on this one because it was my first try, and so I'm unpicking this and just redoing it with the yellow being the top piece as opposed to, I think this is the lily pad things. So I'm just doing that because I'm trying to make sure everything is looking the way I want it to look, and I knew if I just like didn't take the time to unpick this, I would regret it and it would be a flaw I would focus on later, so I'm saving later me some trouble here. As I got further on in the process, I ended up looking at the ruffle either above or below that kind of related to the one I was currently working on to make sure that, again, I was distributing the color evenly in the way I wanted to. This one here was kind of a fun one to arrange because I had just some interesting different shaped linens that I wasn't working with on all the other skirt panels. And then I am on to and arranging the next level. This is honestly just a project of me arranging and rearranging and sewing, and I didn't want to show the sewing process each time on camera because this would get really repetitive and boring, but I did want to show the arranging because I feel like it might give you some intel into kind of how my brain was working with this, and if you ever like want to try to achieve this look, it will give you a good idea about like how to do that. So hopefully like arranging process is helpful, even though it does feel a little bit redundant. And here I am finally arranging my last top panel, which is the smallest, and I'm feeling very excited and accomplished. So here what I'm doing is I am pinning the stitching line to the line I drew on the skirt. I sewed my first one off camera because I was scared, but now that I feel more confident in what I'm doing, I'm using that basting line that I put in.
that felt kind of silly, and I am so glad I did it because this is really, 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 really useful for me. So that is what I'm doing here, is I'm just making sure everything is sitting and all my ruffles will lay exactly correct before then sewing them down. And then after sewing them down, I had to finish the seam, and the way the pattern told you to do that was just to use bias tape, like a single fold bias tape, and cover your unclean edges with it so that way they won't ravel later. I felt like this was a especially good thing to do in this case because all these fabrics are cut every which way, so I think finishing was a good idea. But also I have so much bias tape from that one estate sale I went into. Bias tape almost doesn't cost anything to me anymore. I figured it wasn't a big deal to run it along the top every single ruffle, even though it was a bit tedious. And then once I finish a ruffle, I start the process all over again, because that's basically what this skirt is a ton of repetitive process. With every ruffle I put on it, I got more and more and more excited about this skirt. This was so much work, but it was so worth it in the end. I know we are not even halfway through at this point, but I just want to say that the process for this was rough because it was long. It took a long time, and it was tedious because it was doing the same thing over and over again without much variation, but it was worth it. In a semi-impulsive, rash decision late at night, I decided I needed another panel. I was going to skip the bottom panel of this dress because I thought it would start to get too long, and I didn't want to risk stepping on this. This was kind of a more complicated one because it was my biggest piece I had to cover, and I had the least amount of pieces left to cover it with. So this one was a real configuration of figuring out how to get everything to fit together, but I did figure it out in the end, and I do really like it, and I'm really glad I added this bottom ruffle. But it definitely added like another layer to the process because I so much did not want to go back to doing this. I felt like I was done with this and like I shouldn't have to do it again, but I knew I wanted that extra panel at the bottom, and so I did it. And because I had decided this after sewing on 3 of the ruffles, the skirt had gotten quite heavy, I decided now was the time to do the double turn hem of the lining piece. It was interesting because the way I had like kind of done the math on this, I thought the final panel would hang from like kind of the end of the skirt, and that wasn't the case, which is again why I wanted that extra bottom ruffle. Is it wasn't the length I was expecting because I did my math wrong and can't count. And now we are back to the tediousness of finishing up all the other ruffles up at the top. I still have 3 left to go at this point in time. This is my reminder to you that if you enjoy my work here, I put tons of love and labor into this channel, so if you want to buy me a coffee over on Ko-fi, I always really, really, really appreciate it. It definitely always puts a smile on my face and makes my day a little, but of course there's no obligation. I don't want anyone spending money that they don't have, especially in these economic times, but I just do want to throw it out there because as you can see, I do a lot for this channel and to provide this free content for y'all. I spent almost 4 hours adding the ruffles to this, so a lot of work, but again, every ruffle I added, I got happier and more excited.
Alright, hello. It is a couple weeks later. I had a bit of a back flare-up and was also just busy. And I think I got sick again. I don't know. It's been kind of a weird few weeks for me, but I'm back and I'm continuing on this project. I did get the pattern in for this, for the bodice. I am going to be doing version 1 here, which is like just a high neck sleeveless. I knew I wanted this to be sleeveless to balance out like how heavy the skirt is. Speaking of the skirt, here she is. I think this is literally one of my most favorite things I have ever made. It's pretty heavy, I will say that, like it's a lot, but I think it is so freaking gorgeous. So basically today, I have 2 days to work on the bodice, and today my goal is to cut out the fabric. I have to make some pattern alterations to make this bodice fit onto this skirt. If I have time or desire today, I'd love to get the patchworking all sewed onto the bodice, but there's a chance I might not. I'm trying to take it really slow and not sew for probably more than like 3 hours a day right now. I'm gonna try to be very, very careful with my body limitations, especially since to alter this pattern, I'm gonna have to trace it, which is really hard on my body. I'm just gonna try to take my time and do what I can do when I can do it. That is the scoop, and we're gonna go ahead and jump into me working on this pattern.
So for the bodice, the first thing I did was I traced my pattern. However, what I've done here that you can't tell is I've folded up the bodice where the narrowest part of the waist is, because I assume that is about where I want the skirt to come from, is where the narrowest part of the waist is. However, on this pattern, this was a little bit of a mistake that I'll have to correct later, but that is a later me problem I didn't know was coming. But right now I am just making sure to really faithfully trace this pattern. After I traced them, I started measuring the measurements, and the measurements weren't adding up to the skirt measurements I had. The math was not mathing, and I got all mathed out, and I just gave up, and I decided it was later me's problem, which is not the move, but right there and then I was like, I can't handle this right now, so I didn't. And then here I am again cutting out this lawn first, which is the base of the bodice, so that way I can put the patchwork on it. And then I sort of followed a similar process to the skirt. The patchwork for the front of this was a lot harder and took me a lot more time to figure out, because I'm trying to figure out how to balance it with the darts and make sure like nothing that I want is getting like lost in the darts. I'm feeling afraid to cut these. I'm feeling all the feelings and having kind of a hard time, and so I am arranging and rearranging and rearranging and rearranging to get this to look the way I want it to. So the biggest thing that I know I want is I want this doily up in the center front of my garment to be a little cutout there, just to kind of hopefully make this dress feel less like I am being swallowed by a pile of table linens. So that is what I am trying to figure out here, and as you can see, I'm continuing to move things around and I'm not very happy with it. And with a lot of arranging and rearranging, I have finally gotten it to a point I'm happy with, and I'm starting to pin all of these pieces down. It is ridiculous. I think I probably fiddled with this for almost 45 minutes before I ended with something I was happy with. And the last thing I hadn't sewn down was the doily, because I wanted to make sure it was pretty close to center, which is what I'm doing here with like this kind of folding technique. Did this folding technique work? I don't know, but it's centered enough for me. And then after this, I then move to the back panels and I do this process all over again. This is both really tedious, but also a process I enjoy because I'm using a different like section of my brain than I normally use from sewing. Sewing is a puzzle for me, and that's why I really like it. However, in this case, with the way I'm putting the linens together, it's almost even more like a puzzle than usual, and like figuring out how to use your eye to balance pieces is just really satisfying. And I think many of you know this, but I have a formal art degree, and so with that it's kind of fun to use. I felt kind of like I was school again, kind of using some skills that I don't always get to use at my job to kind of like look at colors and patterns and make sure everything is looking aesthetic per se. And so this was a fun process, even though it was a very, very tedious process. And then again, once I get to somewhere that I'm happy with, I am sewing these down. I'm just top stitching them. A lot of these I already had the finished edge, so I am just following that in kind of like random patterns. This was also a good exercise for me, like having better control over my machine. I am not always the most careful sewing machine user, so this was kind of a fun experience in hitting all of those curves and angles and stopping and starting exactly where I wanted to. It was kind of a good like sewing machine brush up. And then my final step for today is I am pinning down these flowers because I need to hand stitch them down, the flowers of the doilies, so they aren't just like dangling everywhere and looking really unfortunate. I had every intention of showing you me stitching these down on camera, but apparently I forgot. So here, what I end up doing is I'm just kind of like basting down almost like key points of each flower. I'm not carefully and tediously like sewing down each flower a ton. There's a good chance that at some point I'm going to have to work on stitching these down again for extra security, but for now I was just kind of trying to move through and get this project going and close to finished. So it's the next morning, and basically all I have left to do is the less brain intensive part. I just have to assemble the bodice and attach it to the skirt. So I'm pretty excited because most of the like color puzzling is done. So here what I am first doing is I am pinning the darts. I'm trying a different dart pinning method that hopefully makes it so I don't pin the wrong side of the dart and have to deal with that with my sewing machine. And then I am ironing the darts. I am quite pleased actually because these darts actually ended up hitting exactly where I wanted in relation to like the embroidered swoopy flowers. So I am a happy camper. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get the pleats to pleat correctly. I am not particularly talented at pleats. It's why you don't see me use them often, but I felt like the pleats on this top mirrored the pleats in the skirt really really, really well, and so that's why I wanted to use this top pattern. But it did take quite a bit of fussing for me to get them right, especially because the crochet doily was where the darts were. And the crochet doily, of course, does not fold and pleat particularly well. But once I got that done, I went ahead and after I basted the pleats down, I went ahead and I sewed the shoulders together, which was the next step. And then I started working on the facings. First, what I did was I put on a stiffer inner facing so that way the collar would hopefully be a little stiffer. I think this kind of backfired on me in the end, but it did work out. It's just, I would say, maybe not my fave. And then of course I am pinning together at the shoulder seams to make sure that these are ready for actually going and attaching to the bodice. And then the way this pattern has you do the collar is first you stitch down the inside of the collar, I guess right sides together technically, and then after that it has you press that up so the inside is a clean seam. And then you sew right sides together of just the collar this time. What you can hopefully tell is what's happening here is that I'm just sewing the collars together. A lot of patterns you sew the collars together and then you attach them to the bodice, but this doesn't have you do that because it's trying to get you to get a cleaner front collar. Because the last step of this is to then turn the collar inside out, or right side out I mean, and then press it to have then the outside be top stitched down onto the outside so that way it looks really nice. This is not my preferred way to do a collar. I should have stuck with my instincts and done it the way I know I do collars best, but I did do it this route, and so for me the collar ended up looking a little clunky, but this option does work for people, so if you haven't tried this method, it's definitely worth a shot on certain collars, but know that like it doesn't work for me. For example, I would much rather have to hand stitch the inside of the collar and not ever have to do a top stitch and have the outside be the nice machine stitching. But with the collar done, I can finally go ahead and focus on the armhole facing. So here I have already stitched the two facing pieces together, and then I am just doing a quick fold over narrow hem so that way it will be a clean seam eventually. And then I am doing my last bit of doily cutting here, where I knew I kind of wanted these half circle doilies as like a flutter sleeve on my shoulders. I do like sleeveless on me, but I knew I would like a flutter sleeve with this a little bit more, so I went ahead and did that. And then I did like kind of some rough measuring, and I just made sure the middle point was on the top of my shoulder and then sewed them down, and that's how I made sure they were even, is basically through like mathematics. I think this worked fine. I don't have any beefs with it, but I have to do this before I then go ahead and pin on the facing, because this will then be sandwiched in between the facing and the dress, so that way it will just poke out like a little wing on my shoulder. And then here I am actually stitching that down, where I will then understitch this so that way I can encourage the lining in the sleeves to sit inside where it should. And then I can finally sew the sides together. This is another like more odd order of operations than a lot of patterns tell you to do. A lot of patterns will actually have you sew up the side seams and sew the facing in a circle on the bodice. But here, because they usually have you having a side zipper here, they don't have you do that. But I actually don't mind this method because I do sometimes feel like it gets you a smoother look on the armpit of your sleeve, or I guess your sleeveless garment. And then it's finally time to combine the bodice to the skirt. What you don't see here that I did all off camera, and I really wish I recorded because I think it's important to show mistakes, but basically the bodice is way too big for the skirt because these are not, I am smushing multiple patterns together. So what I had to do is I actually had to take out a whole inch in the bodice sides, and then on top of that, or I guess I took out 2 inches now I think about it. I took out 2 inches of the sides of the bodice. The bodice hit me way too low, like the waist of the skirt did. So I had to unpick the bodice I had put in, and then I cut the bodice an inch shorter, and then I re-sewed it in so that way everything would hit exactly the way I wanted. This was definitely worth all the work. I just wish I filmed the work. A lot of times when I'm problem solving like this, I don't remember to film because I'm so deep in the problem and I'm just trying to like puzzle it out, and I get really focused and like fixated and I forget to film. But I did finally figure it out, and my last bit of machine sewing for this dress is just putting in the zipper. I chose this really cute light pink zipper. I actually would have gone white on this if I had a white zipper, but pink was what I had. And I did think it matched all the doilies really, really well. So I was more than happy with the pink. So I don't feel like I can show you this well from any angle because I'm working with so much fabric at this point. And of course my camera chose to focus on my shoulder instead of on the sewing I was doing. But the trickiest thing here with the zipper is the ruffles. I didn't want to sew over the ruffles and miss kind of that fluttery effect that they get in the back. I didn't want them tacked down on like the top 3 layers of the ruffles. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm sewing up until just the edge of the top of the ruffle, and then I'm stopping, I'm flipping the ruffle up, moving my needle down to the very top of the underside of that ruffle, and then sewing down again. This did equal a very crooked zipper, but the dress still had the effect that I wanted, so I am okay with this not so great zipper method. And we are getting to the final finishings. One of it is cutting out the doily area that I kind of used as like an inset lace. And so here what I'm doing is I'm cutting a circle, and then I will cut into like kind of closer to the seaming, so then I can fold this back and sew it down so it will have a nice clean edge. And we'll have that kind of nice little like bodice window. I actually think this really helps with like the heaviness of this dress. This dress is just, it's a lot of fabric. I'm very petite, and I feel like having this kind of window cut out on the bodice really helped it feel less like I was drowning or like being suffocated by this pile of linen. So here I am stitching down the arm facings just by hand with a quick whip stitch. I could be sloppier with my stitches because there's 2 layers of fabric here, and so they wouldn't be seen up at the top layer. And then here around the doily window, I am just double folding each of those pieces, and I am whip stitching that down as well. And then after trying this on again, the collar just felt really plain and blah. So I went ahead and I had cut off some of the like pansy shapes from the doily at the top where I knew it would be sewn into seam. And so instead I am then putting those around the collar, and I think it adds the perfect touch for this. And then for my final, I'm putting the Haylee Marie Vintage and Spooky made by Tag. And I am so excited to show you the reveal of this project. It turned out amazing, and I hope it inspires many in upcycle. So let's hop into that reveal. You have seen the reveal at this point. I hope you enjoyed it. I absolutely adore this dress. As always, I have my spreadsheet for my cost breakdown, which we're gonna jump into right now. So the cost for this, I had to do some estimating just because some of these things I've had for a really long time, and it was before I was keeping cost counts and stuff like that. So everything's about approximate, and I'll explain those breakdowns as I go. Fabric, I spent $257.17. So the way I broke this down is, I believe the lawn that I used about 4 yards, and I can't remember exactly what it was per yard, but it in theory comes out to about $30.84. For the doilies and tablecloths and all of that, I don't actually know what I paid for these items, so I just went with a running total from the Aurora Antique
Pavilion, I think is what it's called, which was $226.33. There's a good chance I got some of these linens cheaper at thrift stores, especially when I was in Pennsylvania, but I just don't really know what I paid for them, and the pile that I brought back from the Aurora Pavilion was about how much linens I actually needed to complete the entire garment. So that is kind of what that guesstimate is. For notions, I spent $4.18 because all I needed was thread and the zipper. Everything else we were good to go on. The pattern, so this used 2 patterns, so this made it kind of more expensive. This is a total of $44.83 on patterns because I used a separate pattern for the top and the bottom. And the bottom was a Lady Marlowe pattern, which I will link down below. So that makes it just like a smidge bit more expensive. So that brings my spending to $306.18. The Fillyboo dresses, I believe, run around $500, so I think that's a pretty good price. You can get the Fillyboo dresses on 50% off, which then would be about $250. However, honestly, I love this dress so much more knowing it's a bunch of like handwork that was done over decades by various women. And so I'm more than happy to have paid this price for this dress because it is still cheaper than the Fillyboo, and it's definitely like a more unique piece than the Fillyboo dresses I was inspired by. So as far as labor, this dress took a lot of work. This took 26 hours and 45 minutes. This would obviously not take that long to make if you weren't piecing all these things, and I definitely think probably 5 to 6 hours was spent just piecing and figuring out how everything went together. So as always, we pay a living wage on this channel, so if I were to pay myself a living wage to produce these items, I would have to make $32.70 an hour. So that 26 hours and 45 minutes times $32.70 is $874.73. Which would bring us to a grand total of $1,180.91. I don't have a strong comment about that in relation to this dress. I mean, if you actually think about it, this dress has even more labor in it than that because of all the women who made and embroidered all the tablecloths and napkins and center things and pillowcases that I made. So there's actually tons and tons and tons of hours of labor put into this dress besides just mine. So I like I said, I don't really have a strong comment. It feels about right for like a bespoke upcycled, like really labor intensive dress. And again, if you think about the Fillyboo being done at $500, which is not an exactly direct comparison because obviously there's efficiencies in those type of sewing spaces that I can't have as a person who is one person making one thing. That makes it like kind of like the scale feel like it makes sense because they're working off embroidery patterns that already exist. They aren't having to spend the time piecing, and they're working off of like a consistent pattern at that shop versus obviously me trying to put all these different linens together. That wraps up the price breakdown. I found this very interesting, and I definitely feel like I saved money, even though maybe I kind of didn't. My dress is one of a kind, and I absolutely adore it. So let's go ahead and talk about the dress itself. Here is this beautiful piece that I adore. I did wear this dress to work today. It's pretty comfortable. So the biggest place it's not comfortable is the neckline, and I think some of that is just the whole weight of this dress. This is a pretty heavy dress, and so everything's kind of like pulling down, and the neckline's totally like bearable. Like it doesn't really bother me. I noticed a little bit of uncomfortableness in the neckline and in the armholes. I'm gonna keep an eye on the armholes. If next time I wear it I feel similar discomfort, I actually might just lower them by like half an inch. It's a pretty easy thing to do with the way these armholes are. So I will consider that, yeah, if I'm still feeling that way next time I wear it. Neither of those were huge things, and honestly, even though this dress is really heavy, I don't feel like I noticed that it was heavy, and definitely it's a dress that every time I looked down I was gleeful about because I thought it was so beautiful. I got a few compliments, my favorite compliment being another woman on the street. She had blue braids, super cute, and she kind of mimed to me that she loved my outfit and my hair, and I just thought it was fun, and then I mimed back thank you, and it was just like a fun, pleasant interaction. I always really enjoy interacting with women and compliments. I always think the way women give each other compliments are really fun. I'm so proud of this dress. So I guess negatives first. I don't love the front of the bodice. I think I could have maybe put it together a little bit better. I absolutely love up here, which is the focal point of the bodice at least. But the piecing right here just doesn't feel quite right. but I kept playing with it and I couldn't get it to sit exactly the way I wanted. And then the zipper on the back is really, really, really messy. It's almost like a whole inch off, which it's been a while since I've done a zipper that is this far off. And I do think some of that is, I talked about this in the process and now I kind of want to try to show it better, but you can see that like these flaps are all separate from each other, so I had to stop and stitch each time, and I'm sure somewhere in there I lost some inches. So you can see, because I wanted to like maintain the flappiness. Oh, I'm not even holding this up. It's because it's so heavy, but I wanted to maintain like the flappiness and the flow of these in the back. I didn't want them to be stuck down and kind of weird. So yeah, that is why I use that technique of stopping and starting and stopping again, and it definitely made for a weirder, not as good zipper. Like there's definitely a few more bubblings in the zippers, but that's it as far as things I'm like not the happiest with, and they're things I can totally look over and I've now learned from. And so when I make my second dress, which I'm going to make a second version of this dress with my more off-white linens, and I'm going to do a long bell sleeve with a short skirt, probably just the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels, so getting rid of the longest 2, and then doing a bell sleeve and probably a lower neck or another effect kind of like this one. So that is kind of, I don't know, otherwise I think I did everything really well. I'm so ecstatic that this worked out. This cutout also I think really helps with the heaviness visually of the dress. When I was trying on this dress before I had cut out this doily area, it was feeling really like I was suffocating in fabric. Like it just felt like it looked that way, like it looked a little bit too heavy, but once I cut this part out, it really opened it up, and I felt like made the dress look so much less heavy and intense. In a way, I feel like it's kind of hard to explain. I probably should have shown what it looks like without the cutout. I am so proud of this dress. It's not perfect. This is honestly probably one of the most technically messy makes I've made in about 4 months. This has also been the biggest reach of anything I've made. I've never pieced things together like this before, so I'm still immensely proud of it, but I definitely like didn't finish my seams quite as nicely, and the zipper isn't as nice as I would want. I could redo the zipper at some point. Maybe I will if I get in a mood to tackle that. All of that doesn't like detract from how proud I am of this. I felt gorgeous wearing this today. I think this is going to become a new favorite. I was going to say it might become a new travel favorite, except for it would take up a lot of my suitcase. The nice thing too with it being this patchwork is if I spill anything on it, it should blend right in, or I could even embroider the stain to make it blend right in. I haven't stained it yet. A lot of times when I wear white to work, I swear it's the day I stain clothing. Today at work, I tried not to eat anything that could stain this. I just think it's so pretty, and I also just feel kind of really like pleased to have figured out something to do with all these linens, because I have just always really adored these type of linens, and I've always been like bummed that they aren't wearable pieces, I guess, because I feel like a lot of these linens are just like never used because they're so pretty and people don't want to ruin it, or they remember all the hard work that they put into them. So yeah, I really really enjoyed piecing it together and puzzling, and it definitely used like a different part of my sewing brain, because sewing brain I'm usually just kind of following a pattern, and it's a very like, for me, it's honestly like second nature. Like it's almost very thoughtless and natural to me. And this process was definitely a lot less natural to me and took a lot more strategizing around piecing and color blocking and things like that. So it was really fun to do. But I think we're gonna wrap up this video here. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I inspired you to take another look at that drawer of table linens you have and think about what you could do with them. And then of course, if you want to support me over on Ko-fi by buying me a coffee, I always really appreciate it. And then of course there are the free options of commenting down below and liking this video. If you could make a patchwork piece, what type of piece would it be? Like, would it be a dress, a pair of pants? Where would your mind go if you were gonna patchwork some pieces like this together? And then of course, if you are new to this channel, I would love to have you stick around and subscribe. And I will see you all next time. Bye!